One day she gave everything to a stranger, not knowing she was changing her life. Hunger, loneliness, and the streets became her reality until the first act of kindness in return. What started with a sandwich became a movement that changed hundreds of lives. And in the most unexpected moment, the past returned with a proposal on which everything depends. The platform at Westmore was a gray haze. Cold March rain trickled from the sky as if someone had forgotten to turn off a sad symphony. Drops pounded the roof of the platform, pulled in muddy puddles, and trickled into the cracks of the old concrete. The city seemed to be holding back, soaked, tired, indifferent. Maya Levi stood at the edge of the platform, clutching the strap of her bag as if she depended on it to stay upright. She wore a dark coat, too thin for this weather, and scuffed boots that were long overdue for a rest. The wind cut through her soaking wet clothes. Her hands were numb, her fingers red, but her eyes remained clear. There was an anxious determination in them. The train number and departure time were flashing on the timetable screen. Maya looked at it, then at the crumpled piece of paper in her hand, a ticket. One way. To the area where the interview was taking place today. No guarantees. Just a slim chance, so fragile that you wanted to disbelieve. But there was no other. She shoved the ticket back into her pocket and looked down at her palm where she found a $10 bill. Her last money. It was meant for something simple, a cheap cup of coffee, a sandwich after the interview. A little comfort to keep from collapsing completely. Sorry. The voice emerged unexpectedly, soft, hoarse, as if the man had been silent for a long time. Maya turned around and saw the man. He was standing a few steps away, the rain licking his shoulders, his hair sticking to his forehead. His jacket was soaking wet. There was no aggression on his face, not even a plea, only fatigue and confusion. My wallet was stolen. I'm $10 short of a ticket home. Don't ask for pity. It's just that if you could. He fell silent. He looked her straight in the eyes, with that look in which there was no lie, only a stifled, please. Maya froze. Her heart beat faster. This was the very moment when the inner voice, burned by past mistakes, screams, leave. Don't believe. Save yourself. Do you have someone to call? She asked cautiously. The phone is dead. I already tried it, no one wanted to listen. What if you're lying? You can't know. But I'm not lying. He didn't make excuses, didn't play on pity. He just stood there, shivering from the cold. And then something stirred in her. Something that had been silent for a long time. Her mother always said, if you give from the heart, then even deception is not your fault. The good will stay with you. She slowly took the only bill out of her pocket and held her hand in the air. I don't know why, Maya whispered. But I believe you. He didn't immediately extend his hand. As if he was afraid it was a mirage. When he finally took the money, he did so carefully as if it were not $10, but something more. I promise I will return them. Just to get home. The train pulled into the station, the roar of the brakes cutting through the rain. The man nodded, his eyes trying to say more, but there were no words. He turned and disappeared into the stream of passengers, dissolving into a thicket of gray jackets and drops of water. Maya remained standing, pressing her hands to her chest. Her palm still felt the warmth of that bill. Her pocket was empty. Her stomach was empty. There was something incomprehensible in her soul. Either lightness or fear. When her train pulled in, she sat by the window and stared out into the rain. The platform was disappearing into a murky watercolor of glass. The man was gone. And the $10 too. But somewhere inside her there lived a strange, barely perceptible spark, as if, having lost everything, she still retained something. The office building on Tanner Street greeted her with glass and cold. Maya stood at the entrance, her heart pounding in her throat. Her hair sticking to her temples and the emptiness in her stomach echoing dully with hunger and anxiety. She was late. The bus demanded a precise amount she didn't have, so Maya walked, winding through streets that were foreign and hostile. By the time she got there, her legs were aching with fatigue and her clothes were clinging to her body. A woman with a perfectly pulled-back bun and a faded tag on her blouse sat at the reception desk. Interview for a cashier. At 10:30. You're late. The manager is already in a meeting. Make an appointment for another day. Maya tried to explain, even offered to wait, but the words fell into the void. The woman was already clicking the mouse without looking. She went outside, stood under the visor, and simply froze. Men in coats, women with coffee, students with headphones passed by. All with things to do. With directions. And she with nothing. By the time Maya got back to her place, a tiny room above a drugstore with a shared shower and a lamp that flickered like an old star, she was already expected. Mrs. Eleanor Blake, the landlady, was standing at the door. Her arms were crossed, her expression was not angry but tired. Maya, I've really tried to be patient, but I gave the room away today. People are paying, and I have bills to pay. Just until Friday, I found a replacement. Sorry. Get your things today. There was no point in delaying. Maya just nodded. Her backpack held everything: a change of clothes, an old photo of her mother, a cracked phone with no service, and a book, a tattered collection of short stories they read together in the evenings. Everything. That night, she found herself in Westmore's Central Library. She hid behind the shelves, pulled her hood up, and settled into a soft chair in the nonfiction section. The lamps hummed, and the air smelled of old pages and stale air. The guard glanced at her, but said nothing. She stayed there until morning. The next night, she had to leave. It was a holiday. The library was closed. Maya wandered for a long time until she sat down on a bench near a bus stop. The cold penetrated her coat, the wind whipped her hair, and trash rustled under her feet. She hugged her backpack like a life preserver and stared at one point. She didn't cry. Not yet. On the third night, near the same train station, she gave in. Tears flowed silently. Salt soaked into her collar. No hysteria, no screaming. Only pain. She missed her mother, the voice that could simply say, "Everything will be okay." She missed herself, the one who still believed that she could get out. At dawn, Maya went to Goodwin Park, where in the center stood an old bronze statue of a general whose name had long been forgotten. She sat down on a familiar bench, bending her legs, burying herself in her collar. And then she appeared. The woman was close to 70 with gray hair pulled back into a bun, wearing a warm woolen scarf. In her hands was a brown paper bag. Her steps were unhurried but confident. When she approached, Maya looked away, expecting another look of disgust. But the woman stopped. "You look hungry," she said softly. Maya winced. "I'm fine. It's not a sin to accept help." She sat down next to him and carefully unwrapped the bag. There was a sandwich in there, fresh, not store-bought. Bread, ham, cheese, a little mustard. The warm smell struck Maya more than words. "I bring an extra one every day, in case I run into someone." "I can't," Maya whispered. "Why? Is your pride stronger than your hunger?" She didn't say it rudely. Just calmly. Maya looked away and took the sandwich. The first bites were like betrayal. And then, like salvation. "Thank you," she said, barely holding back the lump in her throat. The woman nodded. "My name is Mariette. There's a soup kitchen on Monroe Street. They feed you without asking. And they need hands. Say Carol's name. She'll understand." She stood up. "You don't have to. But if you want, go ahead. And when you can, pass it on." And she left. Maya sat on that bench for a long time, looking at the half-eaten sandwich in her hands. Something trembled. Imperceptibly. Quietly. Monroe Street smelled of bread. It wasn't the kind of bread that came out of a bakery, crunchy, golden-crusted, commercial. No. The smell was different. It wafted through the cracks in the old brickwork, seeped through the crevices of old windows, and soaked into your clothes as surely as heat soaked into a frozen body. It didn't just smell like food. It smelled like life. Real life, without storefronts or filters. And the closer Maya got to the building with the peeling sign that read House of Bread, the more she realized how long it had been since she had smelled anything like it. She stood opposite the doors, as if before a boarder. The glass was cloudy, but silhouettes could be seen behind it. Someone was carrying trays, someone was sitting at a table, someone was laughing, quietly but truly. It all seemed alien. Too warm. Too inaccessible. "They'll think I just came to eat. That I'm one of..." The thought broke off by itself. Because she was one of them. Alone. Tired. Lost. And hungry. So hungry that her stomach felt burned out from the inside. The sandwich from Mariette was a miracle, but it disappeared as quickly as the hope that everything would somehow get better. Maya took a deep breath, clutched her bag to her side, and pushed the door open. The first thing that struck her was the warmth. Not just warm air, but the feeling that she had entered someone else's house, where it smelled of cooked vegetables, bread, soap, and a little bit of comfort. Then came the noise, quiet, muffled. Someone was talking at the table. Somewhere in the kitchen, water was making noise. The metal of the dishes was knocking against the stove. It all merged into a rhythm, even, constant. Alive. It was already getting dark outside. The sunset had painted the clouds copper-colored. The city, so cruel yesterday, now seemed a little less prickly. Maya sat down on the curb by the lamp, stretched out her legs, and watched the passers-by go about their business. The wind ruffled the hem of her jacket. Somewhere in the distance, a bus honked. There was a drawing in her pocket. It was of a flower. Clumsy but real. Like everything that had happened to her today. She didn't know what would happen tomorrow. She didn't know if they would let her in again. She didn't know if she had enough strength. But for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she was falling. She was standing. The kitchen at the House of Bread smelled more than just of food, it smelled of trust. Maya had grown accustomed to these mornings, the soft light through the murky windows, the rhythmic sound of water, the slap of knives on cutting boards. There was an order to it, almost a ritual. She arrived early even before Carol, and each day she began the same way, boiling water, checking the shelves, arranging the bread. With each movement, confidence returned. Small but real. Something she had missed when she stood in the rain with empty hands and a $10 hole in her pocket. Now she had an apron, a responsibility, and a place where she was known by name. It was worth more than she had ever imagined. Carol no longer squinted at her. Now, as if she were someone she could rely on. She no longer said, "Put the dishes in the sink." She simply nodded, and Maya knew what to do. There were other volunteers, some who came for a day, some who stayed for a week, but none of them were so involved. Maya didn't try to seem indispensable. She was just there. Where she was not expected, but where she was needed. One of the regulars, Mr. Derrick, an old man with a cane and a velvety voice, once told her, "You don't give out food, you give out respect, girl. I can see it." And she remembered. Not because he flattered her, but because there was no falsehood in his eyes. Only the truth, suffered and lived. One Tuesday, when the sun was just beginning to break through the gray sky and Maya was just polishing the tables before the first stream, the door rang. The bell was familiar, homely, but this time the sound was different. A little louder. A little brighter. She didn't pay attention. Until she heard footsteps. Confident. Even. Not the ones she was used to. People came here differently, either tired or hesitant. These steps were alien. She turned around. The man stood at the entrance. Tall, in a dark coat, with smooth shoes and a straight posture. His hair was short and neat, his gaze was direct. Too well-groomed for this place. Too confident. Carol, who came out of the kitchen with a tray, froze. "Who are you going to see?" Her voice sounded not stern, but wary. "I'm looking for a girl," he said. "She works here." Maya. The name that came from the stranger's lips seemed to tear the air. Maya felt her chest freeze. Her hands dropped the cloth she was holding. He turned around and their eyes met. He didn't smile right away. At first, he looked as if he wanted to make sure. And then the corners of his lips twitched slightly and that same thing, forgotten, flashed in his eyes. "Hello," he said. "You," Maya's voice broke. "It's you." He stepped closer. He took off his gloves. There was the same uncertainty in his fingers as there had been at the station. But now there was strength over it. Restrained, but solid. "I never forgot you," he said. "And I never stopped looking for you. I'm sorry it's so late." She didn't know what to answer. The whole kitchen, the whole hall merged into one big, muffled noise. There was only him. And her breathing. He took his wallet out of his inside pocket. He carefully pulled out a bill, a $10 bill, and handed it to her. "I'm not so much repaying the debt as I am thanking you. You saved me then. Not with money. With faith." She took the bill. Not right away. Her fingers were shaking. Not from excitement. From the excess of everything, the past, the present, the impossible. "I gave you my last hope," she whispered. "And you turned out to be real." He sat down with her at the table. In the kitchen, someone was slamming doors, someone was fixing a kettle, someone was laying out spoons. But they didn't hear. He told her everything. That he was in the city for a reason. That he was taking part in a project to study social adaptation. He wanted to understand how people survive without support. He left without documents, without a name. He wanted to see how the world would look at him if only a person remained of him. And almost everywhere he was rejected. Except for her. "After that meeting, I reconsidered a lot," he said. "I returned to my place, to the foundation, and I knew everything should be different. We should not just help, we should see." Maya looked at him and his face seemed to blur before her eyes, in drops of the past, in flashes of change. He was not the lost, trembling man from the platform. But he had not become a stranger. He had simply become himself. He offered her a place in the project. Not as a mentee. As a partner. He told her that his foundation had a program that needed people who knew life beyond reports. He showed her a brochure. There were vans with the inscription "Open Hands," mobile kitchens, projects for teenagers, temporary shelters. "It all exists," he said. "But we want to do more. And you can be a part of it. Not because I owe you. But because you can hold on to what others drop. Hope." Maya didn't answer right away. Her eyes stung. Not from emotions. From light. From truth. "What if I break?" She whispered. "So I'll be there. And we'll go up together." He didn't promise an easy life. He didn't talk about miracles. He just looked at you the way you look at an equal. at someone who is capable of changing something, not with words, but with actions. They walked out of the kitchen together. It smelled like spring outside. Early, damp, but alive. He handed her a business card. It had the name of the foundation, his name, and a number on it. Think about it, he said. We don't have a deadline. There are only doors. Open ones. After he left, Maya stood there for a long time. Carol came up behind her and clapped her on the shoulder. If you don't agree, I'll throw you out, she said. Maya laughed. For the first time, it was easy. Real. Something inside her opened like a window onto a spring day. She didn't know what would happen, but she knew for sure she was ready. Nothing happened at once. There was no explosion, no fanfare, no magical transformation. When Maya first came to the foundation's office, everything was simple. A bright room, the smell of coffee and paper, young voices, running task lists on whiteboards. The space breathed life, not glossy, not ostentatious, but real. Work was in full swing here. Plans were made, trips were coordinated, projects were written, and in the midst of all this, she, still in her simple coat, with an apron wrapped in her bag, felt like a person who was crossing the threshold of a new world for the first time. But no one invited her to be a guest. She was welcomed as part of the team. Anna, the coordinator, quick, smiling, with a notepad in her hands and her usual ponytail on top of her head, immediately grabbed her by the elbow. First you'll look, then you'll decide what you want to work with. They don't assign things here, they get involved. Can you handle it? Maya nodded. She didn't know if she could handle it, but she was willing to try. The first weeks passed like a newsreel. Training, presentations, field trips. She saw for the first time the shelters where children hid from the world. The hospital wards marked recovery, where women learned to eat again, to speak again. The centers where men over 40 learned how to use email and write a resume. Maya listened, watched, remembered. Gradually, she began to offer her ideas. At first, cautiously at meetings. Then, more confidently. She felt she had something to say. Not because she had read it, but because she had lived it. No one interrupted her. On the contrary, they wrote it down. They discussed it. They applied it. One day, Evan approached her with a thin folder. This is for you, he said. Not a project. An opportunity. Make your own. What would you do if you were trusted with an idea? Inside lay a blank form, sheets of paper with graphs, technical data, and a map of the city. Maya looked at them as if they were an open field. A space where she could grow something of her own. She worked on it in the evenings. At a small table in her new room. She had a room now. A real one. Not a dorm, not a temporary corner. The walls were white, the window looked out onto the roof of the neighboring house where pigeons sometimes sat. There were few clothes in the closet, but all her own. On the nightstand was a photograph of her mother, which she kept even when she lived on a bench. It was quiet here, and in this silence, important things were born. She thought back to the idea of a mobile kitchen. But not just a kitchen, a warm spot. A car that would go where people were afraid to go. To those who were still embarrassed to need help. She remembered those evenings when she was afraid to even ask. She remembered how much energy it took to just admit, I'm having a hard time. The project was called Open Hands. No forms, no interrogations. Simply, we are near. We are here. We do not judge. When she presented the idea to the team, the room was quiet. Then came the questions. Clear, specific. And then the support. It's not just an idea, Evan said. It's a path. A month later, the van was ready. Small, but functional. Inside, there was kitchen equipment, food supplies, tables, a first aid kit, a trash can, even a small shelf with books and children's toys. On the side was a logo in the form of outstretched palms and a simple inscription, warmth. Food. Presents. Maya saw the car for the first time in the evening. It was parked in the foundation's lot, already fully decorated as if it had been waiting only for her. She walked along the body, ran her hand over the paint, looked inside. And cried. Silently. Without hysteria. Just tears. Because it had happened. Because she had done it. The first outing took place in the parking lot of an old shopping center. Officials rarely went there. But there were people there. She was feeding a woman who looked like her 2-year-old self. A man who didn't speak but nodded in gratitude. A boy who smiled only when he held a spoon. Word of the van spread quickly. Even those who had previously hidden began to approach it. And those who wanted to help. A circle of volunteers began to form around the project. Students, pensioners, those who had once been at the bottom themselves. People were drawn to what was sincere. Maya didn't become a star. She just worked. Sometimes from morning till night. Sometimes with a cold. She knew why. She knew she couldn't not do it. Because if not her, then who? And all the while, Evan was there. Not as a savior. As a partner. He showed up unannounced. He brought coffee. He stayed quiet when she was tired. He laughed when she was nervous about meeting the mayor. He didn't push her, he walked beside her. Their relationship didn't just happen. It grew like a tree from a seed. Something that grows when there are roots. One day she met Mariette again. She came to one of the events where they were distributing food in the city park. They hugged. Maya told everything and Mariette just smiled and said, I knew. I knew from that very bench. You had a heart, no one just looked at it. Now everyone sees it. And then, after a few minutes, she added casually, by the way, Evan is my son. Maya froze. What? Well, what did you think? That fate would just throw you people who watch you chew bread? No, my dear. Sometimes we look for those who are worth finding. There were no words. Only silence. And an inner recognition. Yes, it was not accidental. That evening on the foundation's roof, they sat side by side, watching the city lights reflected in the windows. Evan took her hand. When I left then without a name, I thought I would find something in myself. I found it, you. Maya was silent for a long time. And then she said quietly, I found it too. Myself. A year later, there were 3 vans. The center opened a second branch. Their photo from the distribution ended up in the city magazine. And one evening, at a celebration to mark the project's anniversary, Evan pulled out a small box and a folded, neatly ironed banknote from his pocket. This is the same 10. I always wore it, not to return it, but to remember how it all started. He opened the box and held out the ring. Let's start together now. Maya nodded. She didn't answer. Words weren't needed. Someone nearby was applauding. Someone was crying. But at that moment, only they existed. And everything that was built between. Because the most important things don't start with ideal conditions. They start with one choice, with one look, with $10, and with faith, which is returned and multiplied